She looked like any other middle-aged passenger. Faded jeans, simple sweater, paperback novel tucked beside her in seat 7F. When United Flight 2847 started losing altitude over Montana, nobody expected help from the quiet woman who'd been reading quietly for 2 hours. Then severe weather knocked out communication systems and she picked up the radio. "This is Falcon requesting immediate assistance." The F-22 fighter jets escorting nearby airspace went silent. Every passenger watched in stunned disbelief as two of America's most advanced warplanes suddenly snapped to attention, their pilots saluting over the radio to honor the legendary call sign they never expected to hear from a commercial aircraft. The unassuming woman in 7F was about to reveal why her voice commanded respect from the most elite pilots in the military. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Christine Powell adjusted her seatbelt and glanced around the cabin of United Flight 2847 with the casual disinterest of someone who had flown countless times before. She looked like any other middle-aged passenger. Faded jeans, simple sweater, paperback novel tucked beside her in seat 7F. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. Nothing about her suggested anything remarkable or unusual. She was simply another traveler on the Tuesday afternoon flight from Denver to Minneapolis, blending seamlessly into the mix of business passengers, tourists, and families that filled the Boeing 737. The businessman in seat 7E, Patrick Hughes, barely glanced at her as he settled in with his laptop and coffee. Patrick had been flying commercial routes for 2 decades as a sales manager for agricultural equipment, and he prided himself on reading people quickly. The woman beside him struck him as exactly what she appeared to be. Probably a teacher or office worker heading home after visiting family in Colorado. Her book was a well-worn mystery novel, the kind sold in airport bookstores, and she wore comfortable walking shoes that suggested practical priorities over fashion. Nothing indicated that she was anything other than an ordinary middle-aged woman taking an ordinary flight. "Excuse me, would you mind if I put my purse under the seat?" Christine asked politely, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had once smoked but quit years ago. "Of course not," Patrick replied with the automatic courtesy of experienced travelers. He noticed she said thank you with genuine appreciation rather than the perfunctory politeness most passengers used. Her hands, he observed briefly, were steady and competent looking, with short, practical nails and no jewelry except a simple gold wedding band. Flight attendant Adriana Torres moved through the cabin conducting her pre-flight safety check with the efficient professionalism that came from 15 years of commercial aviation experience. She had learned to quickly assess passengers for potential problems, medical issues, or troublemakers, but the woman in 7F registered as entirely unremarkable. Middle-aged, polite, quiet, and clearly comfortable with flying, Adriana had no reason to give her a second thought. "Can I get you anything before we take off?" Adriana asked, pausing beside Christine's seat. "Just some water when you have a chance," Christine replied, already opening her book. "Thank you." Adriana continued down the aisle, mentally cataloging the passengers who might need extra attention during the flight. The elderly woman in row 12 who was traveling alone and seemed nervous about flying. The mother in row 8 who was managing 2 young children and a baby. The businessman in row 3 who appeared to be fighting off a cold and kept coughing. But the woman in 7F didn't merit any special consideration. Captain Noah Turner completed his pre-flight checklist in the cockpit, reviewing weather conditions and flight plans with the methodical precision that had made him one of United's most reliable pilots. At 48, Noah had been flying commercial aircraft for 17 years and had logged over 12,000 hours without a single incident. His first officer, Rebecca Fisher, was equally experienced and competent, with a reputation for calm decision-making under pressure. "Weather looks good most of the way," Rebecca reported, studying the meteorological data on her screen. "Some scattered thunderstorms developing over eastern Montana, but we should be well north of that activity." "Roger that," Noah replied, making final adjustments to the flight management system. "Should be a smooth ride today." Neither pilot had any reason to anticipate that this routine Tuesday afternoon flight would become anything other than another uneventful journey in their logbooks. The passenger manifest showed nothing unusual. 156 passengers and crew, typical mix of business and leisure travelers, no unaccompanied minors, no passengers requiring special assistance. Flight 2847 was scheduled to depart Denver at 2:15 p.m. and arrive in Minneapolis at 5:45 p.m. Central Time, a routine domestic flight that both pilots had flown dozens of times before. Dr. Gertrude Ward, seated in row 9, noticed the quiet woman in 7F with the mild interest of someone who enjoyed observing fellow travelers. At 73, Dr. Ward had been a family physician for 45 years before retiring, and she retained the habit of studying people with clinical curiosity. The woman in 7F appeared to be in her mid-40s, healthy and fit, with good posture and alert eyes. She carried herself with a subtle confidence that suggested competence and self-reliance, but nothing that would make her stand out in a crowd. "First time flying this route?" Dr. Ward asked during boarding, more out of friendliness than genuine curiosity. "No, I fly it fairly regularly," Christine replied with a polite smile, going home to Minneapolis. "I'm visiting my granddaughter," Dr. Ward continued. She had just started college at the University of Minnesota. Pre-med, just like her grandmother was once upon a time. "That's wonderful," Christine said genuinely. "You must be very proud." Their brief conversation was pleasant but unremarkable, the kind of casual interaction that occurs between strangers sharing a flight. Dr. Ward returned to her medical journal, and Christine opened her mystery novel, both women settling in for what they expected to be a routine journey. Patrick Hughes, meanwhile, was reviewing sales reports on his laptop while occasionally glancing at the woman beside him. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have encountered her before. There was a quality to her alertness, a way of scanning the cabin that reminded him vaguely of his military days. But he dismissed the thought as coincidence. Lots of people carried themselves with that kind of quiet awareness, especially women who had learned to be cautious about their surroundings when traveling alone. Flight 2847 pushed back from the gate precisely on schedule, and Captain Turner began the taxi to Denver's runway 34R. The afternoon departure meant they would be flying during some of the day's most beautiful light, with clear views of the Rocky Mountains during takeoff, and the Great Plains stretching endlessly ahead once they reached cruising altitude. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Turner speaking," Noah announced over the intercom as they lined up for takeoff. "We've been cleared for departure and we're expecting a smooth flight to Minneapolis this afternoon. Flight time will be approximately 2 hours and 30 minutes, and we'll be cruising at 37,000 feet. Weather conditions are favorable, so we should arrive right on schedule. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Christine closed her book and looked out the window as the Boeing 737's engines spooled up for takeoff. She had made this journey many times over the past few years, but she never tired of the view of the Rockies from the air. The mountains held memories for her, both beautiful and painful ones, from a time when her life had been very different from what it was now. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with the familiar sensation that still gave Christine a small thrill after all these years. She felt the nose lift off, watched the ground fall away beneath them, and experienced the subtle shift in her inner ear as they climbed steadily into the afternoon sky. Flying remained magical for her, even as a passenger, even after everything that had happened in her past. "Beautiful day for flying," Patrick commented, glancing out the window at the clear skies and unlimited visibility. "It really is," Christine agreed, settling back in her seat as the aircraft climbed through 10,000 feet and the flight attendants began preparing for drink service. Neither Patrick nor anyone else on Flight 2847 had any way of knowing that when United Flight 2847 started losing altitude over Montana less than 2 hours later, nobody would expect help from the quiet woman who'd been reading quietly for most of the journey. They couldn't know that severe weather would soon knock out communication systems, and she would pick up the radio with steady hands and a calm voice to say, "This is Falcon, requesting immediate assistance." They had no way of anticipating that F-22 fighter jets escorting nearby airspace would go silent at those words, or that every passenger would watch in stunned disbelief as two of America's most advanced warplanes suddenly snapped to attention, their pilots saluting over the radio to honor the legendary call sign they never expected to hear from a commercial aircraft. The unassuming woman in 7F was about to reveal why her voice commanded respect from the most elite pilots in the military. But for now, Flight 2847 climbed peacefully into the clear Colorado afternoon, carrying its passengers toward what everyone expected would be an unremarkable journey to Minneapolis. Christine returned to her mystery novel. Patrick focused on his sales reports, and Dr. Ward continued reading about advances in cardiac surgery techniques. The flight attendants began drink service, moving efficiently through the cabin with the practiced coordination of experienced professionals. Adriana Torres reached Christine's row with her cart, offering the same cheerful service to every passenger. "What can I get for you folks this afternoon?" "Just a coffee, Black," Patrick requested, not looking up from his laptop screen. "Water with ice, please," Christine said, marking her place in the book with her finger. "Certainly," Adriana replied, preparing their drinks with the smooth efficiency of someone who had served thousands of passengers over the years. She handed Christine her water and noticed the woman's firm, confident grip, the kind that suggested someone accustomed to handling things carefully and precisely. But it was a fleeting observation, unremarkable in the context of routine passenger service. Christine sipped her water and returned to her book, appearing completely absorbed in the fictional detective's investigation of a seemingly impossible murder case. She read with the focused concentration of someone genuinely interested in the story, occasionally turning pages with the quiet satisfaction of a reader following an engaging plot. Nothing in her demeanor suggested she was anything other than what she appeared, a middle-aged woman enjoying a good book during a routine flight. The Boeing 737 continued its climb toward cruising altitude, passing through 25,000 feet as it headed northeast over the Colorado Plains. Captain Turner maintained steady contact with air traffic control, receiving routine clearances and altitude assignments that marked another completely normal departure from Denver International Airport. United 2847, contact Denver Center on 124.35, came the controller's voice through the cockpit speakers. Denver Center, 124.35, United 2847. First Officer Fisher responded, switching radio frequencies with practiced ease. In the passenger cabin, the routine of commercial flight continued undisturbed. Passengers read books, worked on laptops, listened to music, or simply gazed out the windows at the landscape passing below. Parents managed children. Business travelers reviewed presentations, and retirees like Dr. Ward enjoyed the simple pleasure of traveling to visit family. Christine Powell turned another page of her mystery novel and settled deeper into her seat, apparently content with her book and her water. She looked, to anyone who might notice her, like exactly what she seemed to be. An unremarkable passenger on an unremarkable flight, reading an unremarkable book while traveling from one ordinary destination to another. But appearances as passengers on United Flight 2847 would soon discover could be extraordinarily deceiving. The first hint that this would not be an ordinary flight came exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes after takeoff, when Captain Turner noticed an unusual vibration in the aircraft's primary control surfaces. It was subtle at first, barely perceptible even to his experienced hands on the controls, but it was definitely not normal. "Rebecca, are you feeling that?" Noah asked his first officer, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that pilots used when something might be developing into a problem. First Officer Fisher immediately focused her attention on the aircraft's systems, scanning instruments and monitoring the subtle sensations that experienced aviators learn to interpret. The vibration was there, faint but persistent, and it seemed to be increasing in intensity very gradually. "I feel it," Rebecca confirmed, beginning systematic checks of all aircraft systems, starting troubleshooting procedures now. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The vibration in United Flight 2847 intensified over the next 10 minutes, transforming from barely noticeable to distinctly concerning. Captain Turner's experienced hands detected the irregular tremor through the control yoke, a rhythmic pulsing that suggested something in the aircraft's control systems wasn't functioning properly. He had encountered similar symptoms twice before in his career, both times requiring immediate attention and careful handling. "Engine parameters all normal," First Officer Fisher reported, methodically working through diagnostic procedures. "Hydraulic pressure holding steady, electrical systems green across the board." Rebecca's voice maintained professional calm, but Noah could hear the underlying tension that developed when pilots encountered unexplained mechanical anomalies at cruising altitude. They were currently at 37,000 feet over eastern Colorado, approaching the Nebraska border, with clear skies and light winds that should have provided ideal flying conditions. "Let me try adjusting the trim settings," Noah said, making subtle corrections to the aircraft's control surfaces. The vibration persisted, seeming to originate somewhere in the primary flight controls rather than the engines or other major systems. In the passenger cabin, most travelers remained unaware of the developing situation. The vibration was subtle enough that only the most experienced flyers might notice anything unusual, and even then, they would likely dismiss it as normal turbulence or minor mechanical quirks that were common in commercial aviation. Christine Powell, however, immediately recognized the irregular pulsing for what it was. Her fingers tightened slightly on her book as she felt the distinctive rhythm of control surface flutter, a potentially serious condition that required immediate diagnosis and correction. She had encountered similar problems numerous times during her military service, often under much more challenging circumstances than a routine commercial flight. Her training urged her to assess the situation carefully before taking any action. The vibration appeared to be increasing in frequency and intensity, suggesting whatever was causing the problem was getting worse rather than resolving itself. She estimated they had perhaps 15 to 20 minutes before the condition became dangerous enough to require emergency procedures. Patrick Hughes noticed his coffee beginning to ripple in a regular pattern and glanced around the cabin with mild curiosity. "Little bit of turbulence," he commented to Christine, returning his attention to the spreadsheet on his laptop screen. "Seems like it," Christine replied neutrally, though her experienced assessment told her this was definitely not turbulence. She discreetly observed the other passengers, noting that most remained absorbed in their activities, unaware that anything might be developing into a serious problem. Dr. Ward, several rows behind them, had also noticed the vibration but attributed it to the kind of minor mechanical irregularities that were normal in aircraft operation. As a physician, she had learned to distinguish between symptoms that required immediate attention and those that were merely uncomfortable but not dangerous. This felt like the latter category. Adriana Torres was collecting empty cups and trash from the completed beverage service when she felt the aircraft's unusual motion. 15 years of flying experience had taught her to recognize the difference between normal flight characteristics and conditions that might require crew attention. She paused in the galley and used the interphone to contact the cockpit. "Captain Turner, this is Adriana. Are you aware we're experiencing some irregular vibration back here?" "We're tracking it, Adriana." Noah's voice came through the speaker with reassuring professionalism. "We're working through some diagnostic procedures right now. Nothing requiring passenger notification at this time, but keep me informed if you notice any changes." "Understood, Captain. Everything looks normal in the cabin for now." Adriana continued her duties while maintaining heightened awareness of the aircraft's behavior. She had been through several emergency situations during her career and understood the importance of staying calm while monitoring conditions that could develop into more serious problems. Meanwhile, nearly 200 miles away at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Great Falls, Montana, Major Ethan Stewart was conducting routine flight operations in his F-22 Raptor as part of a training exercise designed to test intercept capabilities over civilian airspace. His call sign Shark had been earned through aggressive precision flying and tactical excellence that made him one of the squadron's top pilots. Malmstrom Control, Shark Flight requesting permission to extend training area to include Sector 7 Delta, Ethan transmitted, reviewing the flight plan displayed on his cockpit screens. Shark Flight, cleared to extend into Sector 7 Delta. Be advised, moderate civilian air traffic transiting your area at various altitudes. Captain Allison Collins, flying as Ethan's wingman with the call sign Viper, maintained perfect formation position while monitoring radio communications and tracking civilian aircraft on her radar display. She had developed her reputation through exceptional situational awareness and tactical precision that complemented Ethan's aggressive flying style. Shark Lead, I'm showing civilian traffic bearing 090, 37,000 feet eastbound track, Allison reported, identifying United Flight 2847 among the several commercial aircraft transiting the training area. Copy, Viper. Maintain separation and continue exercise profile. Neither pilot expected their routine training mission would soon become something entirely different, involving direct coordination with a civilian aircraft in distress and recognition of a legendary call sign that would fundamentally change their understanding of the woman sitting quietly in seat 7F. Back aboard Flight 2847, the vibration had become severe enough that passengers throughout the cabin were beginning to notice. Conversations quieted as travelers looked around with the uncertain expressions people wore when something seemed wrong, but they couldn't identify exactly what it was. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Turner." Noah's voice came over the intercom with the carefully controlled tone pilots used during developing situations. "We're experiencing some minor mechanical vibration that we're currently diagnosing. As a precautionary measure, we're going to begin a gentle descent while we work through our procedures. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and remain seated until further notice." The announcement created the subtle shift in cabin atmosphere that occurred when passengers realized their flight might not be entirely routine. Conversations became quieter and more serious, electronic devices were set aside, and people began paying closer attention to the aircraft's behavior and the crew's actions. Christine felt the aircraft begin its descent and estimated the rate at approximately 1,000 feet per minute, suggesting the pilots were managing the situation conservatively while maintaining control authority. She recognized the symptoms as consistent with flutter in the primary flight controls, possibly in the elevator or aileron systems, which could become catastrophic if allowed to progress without intervention. Her fingers drummed silently against the armrest as she calculated their options. They were currently over sparsely populated rural Nebraska, with Denver behind them and Minneapolis still over an hour away. Omaha offered the closest major airport with full emergency services, but even that was at least 30 minutes flying time given their current position and the need to descend gradually. "Excuse me," Dr. Ward's voice carried from several rows back, addressing Adriana, who was securing the galley equipment according to emergency procedures. "Is everything all right? I've been on a lot of flights, and this doesn't feel normal." "The captain is handling the situation, ma'am," Adriana replied professionally. "We're just taking some precautionary steps while they work through their procedures." Patrick Hughes had closed his laptop and was gripping his armrests with the white-knuckled tension of someone who flew frequently but never felt entirely comfortable when things deviated from normal routine. "Do you think this is serious?" he asked Christine, seeking reassurance from the calm woman beside him. Christine's response was measured and truthful without being alarming. "The pilots are managing it professionally. Commercial aircraft are built to handle a wide range of mechanical issues safely." Her answer seemed to reassure Patrick, though she could see he remained anxious about the developing situation. Christine understood his concern, but also knew that panic among passengers could complicate an already challenging situation for the flight crew. In the cockpit, the situation was becoming more complex. The vibration had intensified to the point where both pilots had to grip their controls firmly to maintain precise aircraft handling. Warning lights had begun illuminating on the instrument panel, indicating that multiple systems were being affected by whatever was causing the primary problem. "I'm seeing fluctuations in the hydraulic system," Rebecca reported, monitoring gauges that showed pressure variations in the aircraft's flight control systems, still within normal parameters but trending toward the lower limits. "Roger. Let's get vectors to Omaha and declare an emergency," Noah decided, recognizing that their situation was progressing beyond routine mechanical problems into territory that required immediate priority handling and emergency response preparation. "Denver Center, United 2847 requesting immediate vectors to Omaha and declaring emergency for mechanical difficulties." Rebecca transmitted, using the formal language that would trigger coordinated emergency response procedures. "United 2847, Denver Center copies emergency declaration. Turn left heading 060 for vectors to Omaha Epley. Descend and maintain flight level 240. Emergency services will be notified and standing by." The formal emergency declaration changed the dynamic aboard Flight 2847 significantly. Passengers who had been hoping the situation was merely a minor inconvenience now understood they were facing something potentially serious. The cabin became quieter as people processed the implications of an emergency landing at an airport that wasn't their intended destination. Christine felt the aircraft bank left as Captain Turner followed air traffic control's vectors toward Omaha. She calculated their distance and descent rate, estimating approximately 25 minutes flying time to reach the airport if conditions remained stable. However, the continuing vibrations suggested the underlying problem was still worsening, which could complicate their approach and landing procedures significantly. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Dr. Ward asked Adriana, drawing on decades of experience managing medical emergencies and understanding that crisis situations often required all available resources and expertise. "Just remain seated and keep your seatbelt fastened, doctor," Adriana replied. "The pilots have everything under control up front." But Christine knew the situation was more complicated than the crew was letting on. The vibration pattern and the aircraft's responses to control inputs suggested they were dealing with flutter that could progress rapidly from manageable to catastrophic. She had encountered similar conditions during military test flights, situations where split-second decisions and unconventional techniques made the difference between successful emergency landings and total loss of control authority. Her training and experience urged her to remain passive unless specifically requested to assist, but her assessment of the developing emergency told her that conventional commercial aviation procedures might not be sufficient to handle what appeared to be a complex and rapidly evolving flight control problem. The woman who looked like an ordinary passenger in seat 7F possessed knowledge and skills that could prove crucial to saving United Flight 2847, but revealing those capabilities would forever change her carefully maintained civilian life and expose military service that had ended under circumstances she preferred to keep private. As the Boeing 737 continued its emergency descent toward Omaha, Christine Powell faced a choice that would define not only the next few minutes of flight time, but the rest of her life. The quiet woman with the mystery novel was about to discover whether she could remain anonymous when 156 lives potentially depended on expertise that only a few people in the world possessed. The vibration intensified again, and Christine felt the subtle but unmistakable sensation of an aircraft approaching the edge of controlled flight. 23 minutes into their emergency descent toward Omaha, the situation aboard United Flight 2847 deteriorated beyond anyone's expectations. Captain Turner felt the control yoke suddenly jerk violently in his hands, the aircraft lurching sideways as whatever was causing the vibration progressed into something far more dangerous. "We're losing control authority," Noah announced grimly, fighting to maintain level flight as the Boeing 737 wanted to roll unexpectedly to the right. The vibration had transformed into violent shaking that made it difficult to read the instruments clearly. First Officer Fisher grabbed her controls to assist, both pilots now working together to prevent the aircraft from entering an uncontrolled attitude that could become impossible to recover. "Hydraulic pressure dropping rapidly in System A," she reported, watching critical gauges fall toward dangerous levels. In the passenger cabin, the sudden violent motion threw several people against their seatbelts and sent loose items flying through the air. The elderly woman in row 12 cried out in alarm as her purse tumbled into the aisle. Patrick Hughes gripped his armrest so tightly his knuckles went white, his earlier anxiety transforming into genuine fear. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise of the struggling aircraft. Christine remained calm despite the severity of their situation, her trained mind automatically analyzing the aircraft's behavior and calculating their rapidly diminishing options. The combination of control surface flutter and hydraulic system failure was creating a cascade of problems that conventional emergency procedures might not be able to handle effectively. She estimated they had perhaps 5 minutes before total loss of control authority, maybe less if the hydraulic failure continued at its current rate. Omaha was still 15 minutes away under normal conditions, but their current situation was anything but normal. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and keep your seatbelts securely fastened," Adriana announced over the intercom, her professional training taking over despite her own concerns about the aircraft's increasingly erratic behavior. "The flight crew is working through emergency procedures." Dr. Ward, drawing on decades of experience managing crisis situations in medical settings, began mentally preparing to assist with potential injuries if their landing became particularly rough. She had been through enough emergencies during her medical career to understand that preparation and calm thinking often made the difference between manageable problems and disasters. "Ma'am, are you all right?" she asked the younger woman across the aisle who appeared to be hyperventilating as the aircraft continued its violent shaking. "I can't breathe," the woman gasped, clearly experiencing panic symptoms that could become dangerous if not addressed quickly. Dr. Ward unbuckled her seatbelt despite the ongoing turbulence and moved carefully across the aisle, drawing on emergency medicine skills she had used countless times during her career. "Look at me and try to slow your breathing. In through your nose, hold it. Out through your mouth. That's it." Meanwhile, the crisis in the cockpit was intensifying beyond what two pilots could handle alone. The aircraft was becoming increasingly difficult to control, and both Noah and Rebecca recognized they were approaching the limits of conventional emergency procedures. Denver Center, United 2847, Noah transmitted with barely controlled urgency. We're losing hydraulic systems and experiencing severe control difficulties. We need immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport and full emergency response. United 2847, understand you're declaring maximum emergency. Turn right heading 090 direct Omaha Epley, distance 32 miles. Emergency equipment is rolling now. But Christine's experienced assessment told her they wouldn't make it to Omaha under current conditions. The aircraft was losing controllability too rapidly, and they needed alternatives that weren't part of standard commercial aviation emergency procedures. Her internal debate intensified as she weighed revealing her expertise against allowing the situation to continue deteriorating. Every instinct from her military training urged her to act, to use knowledge and skills that could save everyone aboard. But breaking her carefully maintained cover would expose a past she had worked hard to leave behind. The decision was made for her when the aircraft suddenly rolled 40 degrees to the right, far beyond what normal passenger aircraft were designed to handle. Several passengers screamed as books, laptops, and personal items slid across the tilted cabin floor. Christine unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, moving toward the front of the aircraft with the sure-footed balance of someone accustomed to moving around in unstable aircraft during emergencies. "Ma'am, please return to your seat," Adriana called out, concerned about passenger safety during the violent motion. "I need to speak with the pilots," Christine said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that made Adriana pause despite her training to keep passengers seated during emergencies. "I'm sorry, but airline regulations don't allow." "I'm a pilot," Christine interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Military trained. They need help up there that I can provide." Adriana looked into Christine's eyes and saw something that made her reconsider the regulations she had been trained to follow. This wasn't a panicked passenger making unreasonable demands. This was someone who understood exactly what was happening and possessed relevant expertise. "Follow me," Adriana decided, leading Christine toward the cockpit while holding onto seatbacks for support as the aircraft continued its violent motion. The cockpit door was already open as part of emergency procedures, and Adriana knocked on the doorframe to get the pilot's attention. "Captain Turner, there's a passenger here who says she's a military pilot and wants to help." Noah glanced back briefly, his hands still fighting the increasingly unresponsive controls. Under normal circumstances, he would have declined civilian assistance during emergency procedures, but their situation was rapidly moving beyond normal circumstances. "What's your background?" he asked Christine without taking his eyes off the instruments. "Air Force. 23 years active duty, test pilot qualification. I've handled control surface flutter and hydraulic failures in experimental aircraft." Rebecca looked at Christine with new respect, recognizing that test pilot qualifications represented some of the highest levels of aviation expertise in the world. "What do you think we're dealing with?" Christine quickly scanned the instrument panel, noting the hydraulic pressure readings, control position indicators, and other system parameters that told the story of their emergency. Her assessment was swift and accurate. Primary control surface flutter, probably in the elevators, with cascading hydraulic system failure. "You're about 3 minutes from total loss of control authority if the pattern continues." "That's exactly what we're seeing," Noah confirmed grimly. "What do you recommend?" Christine's mind raced through unconventional techniques she had learned during military test flying, procedures developed for handling aircraft that regularly experienced total system failures during experimental flights. Reduce power to idle and use engine thrust differentials for directional control. Disconnect the autopilot completely and fly manually using elevator trim tabs instead of primary control surfaces. It's not in any commercial manual, but it works. Her suggestions were technically sound but represented flying techniques that went far beyond standard commercial aviation training. Both pilots recognized the expertise behind her recommendations, even though implementing them would require trust in a passenger they had never met. "Rebecca, start configuring for manual trim control," Noah decided, accepting Christine's guidance because their alternatives were rapidly disappearing. As the pilots began implementing her recommendations, Christine realized her expertise was now exposed to the flight crew and would soon be apparent to investigators and airline authorities. Her quiet civilian life was about to become very public, regardless of how this emergency concluded. but saving 156 lives was worth any personal consequences she might face later. "What's your name?" Rebecca asked as they worked through the unfamiliar procedures Christine had suggested. Christine hesitated for just a moment, knowing that her answer would change everything. Christine Powell. Military call sign was Falcon. The effect of her call sign was immediate and unexpected. Both pilots turned to look at her with expressions of amazement and recognition. "You Falcon?" Noah asked with barely concealed awe. "The test pilot who saved that experimental program at Edwards. We studied some of your flight test reports during our initial training." Christine nodded reluctantly, uncomfortable with the recognition but focused on the immediate crisis. "That was a long time ago. Right now, we need to get this aircraft on the ground safely." Meanwhile, the F-22 Raptors conducting training exercises over eastern Montana had received notification from NORAD that a commercial aircraft was experiencing a significant emergency in their general area. Major Stewart and Captain Collins were vectoring toward the reported position to provide assistance if needed. Malmstrom Control, Shark Flight has United 2847 in sight, bearing 270, approximately 40 miles southeast of our current position, Ethan reported, observing the commercial aircraft's irregular flight path through his targeting systems. Shark Flight, monitor emergency frequency 121.5 and provide assistance as able. United 2847 is experiencing control difficulties and may require emergency landing at alternate airport. Colonel Lawrence Gibson, monitoring the situation from NORAD Command, was coordinating military assets to support the civilian emergency. He had no way of knowing that the commercial aircraft in distress carried a passenger whose military call sign was legendary among pilots throughout the Air Force. "Sir," Technical Sergeant Sharon Knight reported from her communications console. "United 2847 is requesting direct communication with military aircraft in the area. They're saying they have military expertise on board that might help coordinate emergency procedures." Colonel Gibson authorized the direct communication following established protocols for civilian aircraft requesting military assistance during emergencies. Aboard Flight 2847, Christine had convinced the pilots to allow her to communicate directly with the F-22 escorts, using her knowledge of military procedures to coordinate assistance that commercial aviation couldn't provide. "This is United 2847 requesting immediate assistance from military aircraft in the area." Christine transmitted on the emergency frequency, her voice carrying the calm professionalism that had made her legendary during her test pilot career. "Humprafton." Major Stewart responded immediately, recognizing the expertise in the transmission. "United 2847, this is Shark Flight. We're F-22s in your area and ready to provide assistance. What do you need?" "Shark Flight, I need real-time assessment of our control surface movement and flight path stability. We're flying manual trim only due to hydraulic failure, and I need external confirmation of our aircraft attitude." The professionalism and technical accuracy of the request impressed both F-22 pilots, who recognized they were dealing with someone who understood military aviation procedures at a very high level. "Roger, United 2847, we're positioning for visual assessment now. Can you identify your military advisor?" Christine took a deep breath, knowing that her next transmission would expose her identity to military pilots who might recognize her call sign and its significance. "Shark Flight, this is Falcon providing technical assistance to United 2847. Request priority handling for emergency landing procedures." The radio went silent for several long seconds as both F-22 pilots processed what they had just heard. The call sign, Falcon, was known throughout the Air Force as belonging to one of the most skilled test pilots in military aviation history. The silence that followed Christine's transmission stretched for what felt like an eternity. In the cockpits of both F-22 Raptors, Major Ethan Stewart and Captain Allison Collins stared at their radio displays in complete disbelief, processing the implications of the call sign they had just heard. "Viper, did she just say Falcon?" Ethan's voice carried barely controlled amazement over their tactical frequency. "That's what I heard, Shark," Allison replied, her own voice tight with recognition. "But that's impossible. Falcon retired from active duty 15 years ago, after that incident at Edwards. Nobody's heard from her since." The call sign Falcon belonged to one of the most legendary test pilots in Air Force history, an aviator whose innovations in experimental aircraft handling had revolutionized fighter pilot training throughout the military. Her techniques for managing aircraft with catastrophic system failures had been studied by every test pilot who came after her, and her flight test reports were still considered required reading at the Air Force Test Pilot School. "Shark Flight, this is Falcon." Christine's voice came through their headsets again, cutting through their amazement with professional urgency. "I need immediate confirmation on our control surface positions. We're flying on manual trim only, and I need external verification of our flight attitude." Major Stewart snapped back to the immediate situation, his training overriding his astonishment at hearing a legendary call sign from a civilian aircraft. "Falcon, this is Shark Lead. Moving into close formation for visual assessment now." Both F-22s accelerated toward United Flight 2847, their advanced flight control systems automatically adjusting for the precise positioning required to safely approach a civilian aircraft experiencing severe control difficulties. As they closed distance, both pilots could see the Boeing 737's irregular flight path and the subtle but visible flutter in its control surfaces. "Falcon, your starboard elevator is showing visible flutter, and your aircraft is maintaining attitude through constant control inputs," Ethan reported, providing the external assessment Christine needed to refine her emergency procedures. "Copy that, Shark Lead. Thank you for the confirmation." Captain Collins moved her F-22 into position on the opposite side of the commercial aircraft, her trained eye assessing the damage and stability of the struggling Boeing 737. What she saw impressed her even more than hearing the legendary call sign over the radio. "Shark Lead, whoever is flying that aircraft knows exactly what they're doing," Allison transmitted on their tactical frequency. "They're using engine thrust differentials and trim tabs to maintain controlled flight with almost no control authority. That's pure test pilot technique." Inside the cockpit of Flight 2847, Christine continued working with Captain Turner and First Officer Fisher to implement the unconventional emergency procedures that were keeping them airborne. Her suggestions drew on 23 years of military aviation experience and specialized knowledge of aircraft behavior under extreme conditions. "Reduce power on Engine 2 by about 8%, she instructed Noah. "We need to compensate for the control surface flutter by creating asymmetric thrust that will help stabilize our flight path." Noah followed her guidance without question, recognizing that conventional emergency procedures weren't adequate for their current situation. The aircraft's response was immediate and positive, the violent shaking reducing noticeably as Christine's engine management techniques took effect. "That's working," Rebecca confirmed, monitoring the instrument readings that showed improved stability. "How did you know that would help?" "I've flown experimental aircraft that lost all conventional control authority," Christine explained matter-of-factly. "When everything else fails, you use whatever systems are still working to maintain controlled flight." Meanwhile, Colonel Gibson at NORAD Command was receiving reports that made him increasingly curious about the civilian expertise aboard United 2847. The technical sophistication of the emergency procedures being described went far beyond standard commercial aviation training. "Sergeant Knight, get me a secure line to Air Force Personnel Center," he ordered. "I want to know if we have any record of a retired pilot using the call sign Falcon." Technical Sergeant Sharon Knight initiated the secure database search, though she suspected that accessing information about legendary test pilots might require higher authorization levels than her standard security clearance provided. Back aboard the commercial aircraft, passengers were beginning to understand that something extraordinary was happening. The violent shaking had subsided, and they could hear fragments of radio communications between their aircraft and military fighters that suggested their situation involved more than routine emergency procedures. Patrick Hughes had overheard enough of Christine's conversation with the pilots to realize the quiet woman beside him possessed expertise far beyond what her ordinary appearance had suggested. "You're actually a military pilot?" he asked with amazement. Christine corrected gently, focused on coordinating with the F-22 escorts rather than discussing her background, a long time ago. Dr. Ward, who had successfully helped the panicked passenger regain her composure, was listening intently to the radio chatter she could hear from the cockpit. Her medical training had taught her to recognize competence under pressure, and she was witnessing a level of professional skill that impressed her deeply. "That woman is saving all our lives," she said quietly to the flight attendant who had been checking on passenger welfare throughout the emergency. "I think you're right," Adriana replied, watching Christine work with the pilots with a combination of relief and admiration. In 15 years of commercial aviation, She had never seen a passenger step forward with expertise that could make the difference between survival and disaster. The situation was about to become even more remarkable. Colonel Gibson's security clearance request had reached General Jacqueline Price, Christine's former commanding officer at Edwards Air Force Base, who was now serving at the Pentagon in a senior position overseeing test pilot programs. Colonel Gibson, this is General Price, came the secure transmission from Washington. I understand you're inquiring about a pilot using the call sign Falcon. Yes, ma'am. We have a civilian aircraft emergency where a passenger identifying herself as Falcon is providing technical assistance that appears to exceed normal commercial aviation expertise. General Price paused before responding, processing information that brought back memories of one of the most talented pilots she had ever commanded and one of the Air Force's greatest losses due to institutional failures that she had tried unsuccessfully to prevent. Colonel, you need to understand that Falcon is not just any retired pilot. She's Lieutenant Colonel Christine Powell, one of the most skilled test pilots in Air Force history. Her innovations in emergency flight procedures saved hundreds of lives during her active duty career. The weight of that information settled over Colonel Gibson as he realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. One of the military's legendary aviators using her expertise to save a civilian aircraft while maintaining anonymity that had protected her for 15 years. General, should I notify the F-22 pilots about her background? They need to know who they're working with, General Price decided. Falcon's knowledge and experience could be crucial to saving that aircraft. The secure transmission reached Major Stewart and Captain Collins, just as they were providing another visual assessment of United 2847's condition. The information they received fundamentally changed their understanding of who was coordinating their assistance. Shark Flight, this is NORAD Command, Colonel Gibson transmitted on the secure military frequency. Be advised that Falcon is Lieutenant Colonel Christine Powell, retired, formerly one of our most decorated test pilots. Her emergency procedures expertise exceeds anything in standard commercial aviation training. The impact of that revelation was immediate and profound. Both F-22 pilots realized they were not just assisting a civilian emergency, but working directly with a legendary figure whose contributions to military aviation had shaped their own training and careers. Falcon, this is Shark Lead, Major Stewart transmitted, his voice carrying a respect that had been absent from his earlier communications. We've just been informed of your background. It's an honor to provide assistance, ma'am. Captain Collins added her own acknowledgement over the radio. Falcon, Viper here. Your test pilot reports were required reading during our training. We're privileged to work with you. The recognition from the F-22 pilots created a moment of profound significance that transcended the immediate emergency. For the first time in 15 years, Christine's military service and expertise were being acknowledged publicly by active duty pilots who understood her contributions to aviation safety and military effectiveness. What happened next had never occurred before in military aviation history. Both F-22 pilots, flying some of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, came to attention in their cockpits simultaneously, a gesture of respect normally reserved for the highest-ranking officers. Falcon, Shark Flight requests permission to render honors. Major Stewart transmitted formally. Christine understood the significance of their request, recognizing that the F-22 pilots wanted to salute her over the radio in acknowledgement of her service and current life-saving efforts. The gesture would be witnessed by passengers, crew, and military personnel monitoring their communications. Permission granted, Shark Flight, she replied, her voice carrying emotions she had suppressed for 15 years. Both F-22 pilots executed perfect salutes while maintaining formation alongside United 2847, their gesture visible to passengers who looked out the windows and clearly audible over the radio frequencies being monitored by air traffic controllers and military personnel across multiple states. Falcon, it is an honor and privilege to salute your service and current actions, Major Stewart transmitted. Ma'am, you represent the finest traditions of military aviation. Captain Collins added her own salute and recognition. Falcon, your expertise is saving lives today just as it did throughout your military career. Thank you for your service, ma'am. The moment was unprecedented in both military and civilian aviation. Two of America's most advanced fighters had saluted a civilian passenger, acknowledging her military service and current heroism in full view of everyone aboard the commercial aircraft. Inside Flight 2847, passengers witnessed something they would never forget. Through their windows, they could see the F-22 Raptors maintaining perfect formation while their pilots saluted the woman who had seemed like an ordinary traveler just an hour earlier. Patrick Hughes stared at Christine with newfound understanding and respect. "They're saluting you," he said with amazement. "Yes," Christine replied simply, focused on the continuing emergency but moved by the recognition from pilots who represented the best of current military aviation. The salute had been witnessed by everyone monitoring their emergency communications, from air traffic controllers to NORAD personnel to airline operations centers. Word was already spreading through military and civilian aviation communities that the legendary test pilot Falcon had emerged from retirement to save a commercial aircraft using techniques that no one else possessed. But their emergency was far from over. United 2847 still needed to land safely, and that would require all of Christine's expertise and the continued coordination of the F-22 escorts to guide the damaged aircraft to an airport equipped to handle their unusual approach requirements. "Shark Flight, we need vectors to the nearest airport with longest available runway and full emergency services," Christine transmitted, returning their focus to the immediate requirements of saving 156 lives. The woman in seat 7F had been revealed as one of America's most skilled military aviators, honored by active-duty pilots and recognized for service that had been hidden for 15 years. But her most important work was still ahead of her. Following the unprecedented salute from the F-22 escorts, Christine immediately refocused on the critical task of getting United 2847 safely on the ground. The aircraft's hydraulic systems continued deteriorating, and she calculated they had perhaps 10 minutes of controllability remaining before the flutter condition progressed beyond manageable limits. "Shark Flight, I need immediate vectors to Malmstrom Air Force Base," Christine transmitted, making a decision that surprised even the experienced military pilots. "We need a runway that can handle emergency approach procedures not available at civilian airports." Major Stewart hesitated before responding, recognizing the implications of directing a civilian aircraft to a military installation. "Falcon, Malmstrom has the runway length and emergency equipment, but bringing a commercial flight onto a military base requires authorization from multiple commands." "Then get that authorization quickly," Christine replied with the calm authority that had made her legendary during her test pilot career. "This aircraft won't survive a conventional approach to a civilian airport. We need military emergency procedures and equipment." Colonel Gibson, monitoring from NORAD Command, understood immediately what Christine was requesting. Military airfields were equipped with specialized crash and rescue equipment designed for experimental aircraft and unusual emergency situations that civilian airports couldn't handle effectively. "This is NORAD Command authorizing emergency landing at Malmstrom for United 2847, he transmitted after rapid coordination with base operations. "All emergency services are being positioned for immediate response." Inside Flight 2847's cockpit, Captain Turner and First Officer Fisher were learning emergency procedures they had never encountered during commercial aviation training. Christine's techniques for flying aircraft with compromised control systems drew on knowledge developed through years of testing experimental planes that regularly experienced total system failures. "Disconnect all remaining automatic flight systems," Christine instructed Noah. "We're going to hand-fly this approach using only engine thrust and trim tabs. It's going to require constant control inputs, but it's our best chance of maintaining stability during descent." Rebecca, monitoring the hydraulic gauges, watched the remaining system pressure continue dropping towards zero. "We're losing the last hydraulic system. Manual reversion in all flight controls." "That's actually better for what we need to do," Christine said, surprising both commercial pilots with her assessment. "Manual control eliminates the system conflicts that were causing the flutter. Now we're flying pure aerodynamics." Her explanation revealed the depth of expertise that came from extensive experience with aircraft pushed beyond their design limits. While commercial pilots trained to rely on multiple redundant systems, test pilots learned to fly aircraft when everything failed simultaneously. The F-22 escorts maintained close formation as United 2847 began its approach to Malmstrom Air Force Base, both military pilots providing real-time assessment of the commercial aircraft's stability and control effectiveness. "Falcon, your aircraft attitude is steady and flight path looks controlled," Captain Collins reported. "Rated descent approximately 800 feet per minute." "Copy that, Viper. We're maintaining approach profile using thrust management and trim control only." Passengers throughout the cabin could sense they were descending more rapidly than normal commercial approaches, and many were gripping their armrest with anxiety about their unconventional landing destination. Patrick Hughes had overcome his initial fear and was watching Christine coordinate the emergency procedures with fascination and growing respect. "How did you learn to fly like this?" he asked during a brief pause in radio communications. 23 years of flying aircraft that weren't designed to work properly, Christine replied without looking away from her impromptu position assisting the flight crew. Test pilots spend most of their time figuring out how to land planes that have multiple system failures. Dr. Ward, who had been helping other passengers remain calm throughout the emergency, was observing Christine's work with professional admiration. As a physician, she recognized exceptional competence under pressure, and she was witnessing skills that went far beyond normal commercial aviation experience. "That woman has nerves of steel," she commented to Adriana, who was securing the cabin for what everyone understood would be an unusual landing. "I've never seen anything like it," Adriana replied. "She's completely calm while saving all our lives." The approach to Malmstrom required coordination between military air traffic control and the civilian aircraft, using procedures that had never been attempted before. Christine's knowledge of both military and commercial aviation protocols allowed her to bridge the communication gap between different operating systems. Malmstrom Tower, United 2847 requesting straight-in approach to runway 05 with military escort. She transmitted using proper military radio procedures that impressed the Air Force controllers. United 2847 Malmstrom Tower, you're cleared for straight-in approach runway 05, emergency equipment in position. F-22 escorts cleared to remain in formation through touchdown if needed. The authorization for the F-22s to escort the commercial aircraft all the way to landing was unprecedented, but everyone involved understood they were dealing with circumstances that required breaking normal procedural boundaries. "Shark Flight, maintain visual contact through our touchdown," Christine requested. "If we lose control during final approach, I'll need immediate assessment of our aircraft attitude for recovery procedures." Both F-22 pilots acknowledged her request, recognizing that their role had evolved from routine training mission to active participation in saving civilian lives under the guidance of one of military aviation's most respected figures. As Flight 2847 descended through 5,000 feet, Christine began implementing the final phase of her emergency landing technique. She had Captain Turner configure the aircraft for an approach that used no flaps or slats, relying instead on raw aerodynamic performance to maintain controlled flight. "This is going to feel different from any approach you've ever flown," she warned both commercial pilots. "We're essentially gliding a very heavy aircraft using only basic lift and drag principles." Noah felt the aircraft's response change dramatically as they followed Christine's unconventional configuration recommendations. Without normal control surface authority, every input required careful coordination between engine thrust, trim adjustments, and precise speed management. "I can see why this technique isn't taught in commercial training," he said, working harder than he ever had to maintain approach parameters. "It takes practice," Christine acknowledged, "but it works when conventional methods fail." Meanwhile, word of the emergency had reached far beyond the immediate participants. At the Pentagon, General Price was monitoring the situation with personal interest, knowing that Christine's actions were not only saving lives but vindicating the Air Force's loss of one of its most talented pilots 15 years earlier. "Colonel Adams," she instructed her aide, "I want a complete briefing on this incident as soon as it's concluded. And prepare recommendations for recognizing Lieutenant Colonel Powell's actions today." At Edwards Air Force Base, where Christine had conducted much of her groundbreaking test pilot work, current test pilots were listening to radio communications with amazement and professional admiration. Her techniques for handling total system failure were still studied and taught, but no one had expected to hear them demonstrated on a commercial aircraft emergency. "That's pure Falcon technique," said one current test pilot listening to the approach communications. "She's doing things with that 737 that shouldn't be possible." Back aboard Flight 2847, passengers were beginning to understand that their survival depended entirely on the expertise of the woman who had appeared to be just another middle-aged traveler. The view from their windows showed military runways and facilities instead of the civilian airport they had expected, and F-22 fighters maintaining formation alongside their aircraft in a display of military precision they had never imagined witnessing as civilian passengers. "Are we really going to land at a military base?" asked the young mother who had been struggling with her children's anxiety throughout the emergency. "Yes, ma'am," Dr. Ward replied reassuringly, "and we're in the best possible hands. That woman up there is saving all of us." Christine continued coaching Captain Turner through the most challenging approach of his career, using knowledge gained from hundreds of test flights in experimental aircraft that regularly suffered the kinds of failures Flight 2847 was experiencing. Maintain exactly 145 knots airspeed, she instructed as they passed through 2,000 feet. Any faster and we'll overshoot the runway. Any slower and we'll stall with no recovery options. The precision required for her technique left no margin for error, but it was their only viable option for landing an aircraft that had lost conventional control authority. Every commercial pilot who would later study this incident would recognize that standard emergency procedures would have been inadequate for their situation. 1,000 feet, Rebecca called out, monitoring their altitude as Malmstrom's runway grew larger in their windscreen. Looking stable, Major Stewart reported from his F-22, flight path steady, no visible control surface movement. Copy, Shark Lead. We're committed to landing now. The final moments of Christine's emergency approach technique required absolute precision from Captain Turner, who was implementing flying skills that went far beyond his commercial training. Under her guidance, he was hand-flying a complex approach that utilized aerodynamic principles most pilots never needed to understand. 500 feet. Maintain current descent rate. Christine called out, her voice steady despite the critical nature of their situation. The Boeing 737 descended toward Malmstrom's runway using emergency procedures that had never been attempted with a commercial aircraft, guided by a woman whose military expertise had been hidden from the world for 15 years, but was now saving 156 lives. Ground emergency crews watched in amazement as the commercial aircraft approached their military runway escorted by two F-22 Raptors in a formation that violated every normal protocol but perfectly suited the extraordinary circumstances of Flight 2847's emergency. 200 feet, Rebecca announced, her voice tight with concentration as she monitored instruments that showed they were succeeding with an approach that shouldn't have been possible. Christine's technique was working. The aircraft that had lost conventional control authority was maintaining stable flight through the expertise of a test pilot whose innovations had been developed through years of flying experimental aircraft under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The woman in seat 7F was about to complete one of the most remarkable emergency landings in aviation history, using skills that represented the pinnacle of military flight test experience applied to saving civilian lives. 100 feet, she called out calmly as Malmstrom's runway filled their windscreen. Hold your current approach angle and prepare for touchdown. At exactly 4:47 p.m. Mountain Time, United Flight 2847 touched down on Malmstrom Air Force Base runway 05 with a firm but controlled impact that demonstrated Captain Turner's mastery of Christine's unconventional landing technique. The Boeing 737's main landing gear contacted the concrete with a solid thump that sent vibrations through the aircraft, followed immediately by the nose gear settling onto the runway as the aircraft decelerated using only wheel brakes and reverse engine thrust. "We're down," Noah announced with barely controlled relief, his hands still gripping the controls as he worked to keep the aircraft tracking straight down the center line of the military runway. Christine remained focused on the critical moments immediately following touchdown, knowing that aircraft with compromised control systems could still lose directional control during the rollout phase. "Maintain gentle pressure on the brakes and use asymmetric thrust if we start to drift," she advised, drawing on experience from test flights where landing was often just the beginning of emergency procedures. The F-22 Raptors maintained formation alongside the decelerating commercial aircraft until it had slowed sufficiently to ensure no further assistance was needed, then peeled away in a ceremonial flyover that honored both the successful emergency landing and Christine's remarkable demonstration of aviation expertise. "Falcon, outstanding airmanship," Major Stewart transmitted as his F-22 climbed away from the runway. "It's been a privilege working with you." "Thank you, Shark Flight," Christine replied, her voice carrying exhaustion and relief as the immediate crisis finally concluded. "You made the difference between success and disaster today." As Flight 2847 rolled to a complete stop on the military runway, emergency vehicles that had been positioned along the approach path now converged on the aircraft with practiced efficiency. Fire trucks, ambulances, and specialized rescue equipment surrounded the Boeing 737 within seconds, their crews ready to respond to any injuries or continuing mechanical problems. Captain Turner shut down both engines and activated the parking brake with movements that showed how physically demanding the emergency approach had been. His hands were cramped from gripping the controls throughout the unconventional landing sequence, and his shirt was soaked with perspiration from the stress of implementing flying techniques he had never learned during commercial training. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Malmstrom Air Force Base," Noah announced over the intercom, his voice reflecting both relief and amazement at what they had accomplished. "Please remain seated while emergency personnel inspect the aircraft and coordinate our deplaning procedures." The passenger cabin erupted in spontaneous applause that continued for nearly 2 minutes, as 156 people expressed their gratitude for surviving what they now understood had been a life-threatening emergency. Many passengers were crying with relief, others were laughing with nervous energy, and several were attempting to use their cell phones to contact family members despite limited signal reception at the military installation. Patrick Hughes turned to Christine with tears in his eyes, his earlier anxiety replaced by profound gratitude and respect. "You saved all of us," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks necessary," Christine replied, beginning to feel the emotional weight of what had just occurred. For 15 years, she had lived quietly as a civilian, her military service and expertise hidden from everyone around her. Now her skills had been demonstrated publicly in front of military personnel, commercial aviation authorities, and passengers who would undoubtedly share their experience with the world. Dr. Ward made her way forward from her seat, moving carefully through the cabin where passengers were still processing their survival of an emergency that could easily have ended in disaster. Her medical training told her that everyone aboard would need time to decompress from the psychological impact of their experience. "My dear," she said to Christine, "I've been a physician for 45 years and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. You have a gift that saved all our lives." Before Christine could respond, the aircraft's main door opened and military personnel began boarding to conduct safety inspections and coordinate passenger evacuation procedures. The first person to enter was Colonel Gibson from NORAD Command, who had flown to Malmstrom specifically to meet the legendary pilot whose actions had prevented what could have been a major aviation disaster. "Lieutenant Colonel Powell," he said formally, using her retired military rank in recognition of her service and current actions. "I'm Colonel Gibson from NORAD Command. On behalf of the United States Air Force, I want to thank you for your exceptional performance today." Christine stood and accepted the colonel's handshake, knowing that her period of anonymity was permanently over. "Just doing what needed to be done, Colonel." "What you did went far beyond duty, ma'am. Your techniques saved 156 lives using knowledge and skills that very few people in the world possess." The formal military recognition created a moment of profound significance for Christine, who had left active duty under circumstances that had never properly acknowledged her contributions to aviation safety and military effectiveness. Hearing an active duty colonel express official gratitude helped heal wounds that had remained painful for 15 years. Adriana Torres approached them with the passenger manifest and crew records that would be needed for the official incident investigation. Her respect for Christine was evident in her tone and demeanor, as she addressed the woman who had transformed from an ordinary passenger into the person responsible for their survival. "Ma'am, the FAA and airline investigators will want to interview you extensively about the emergency procedures you implemented. Your actions are going to change commercial aviation safety protocols." The implications of that statement were significant. Christine's demonstration of advanced emergency techniques aboard a commercial aircraft would inevitably lead to reviews of current training standards, and possibly the incorporation of military test pilot methods into civilian aviation education. Outside the aircraft, media representatives were already arriving at Malmstrom Air Force Base, having monitored emergency radio communications and recognized the historic nature of what had occurred. The story of a retired military pilot saving a commercial flight using classified techniques was exactly the kind of dramatic human interest story that would capture national attention. Base Public Affairs Officer Major Patricia Sullivan was coordinating with civilian authorities to manage the unprecedented situation of a commercial aircraft emergency landing at a military installation with significant media implications. "Sir," she reported to Colonel Gibson, "we have news crews requesting access to interview the passengers and crew. This story is already spreading on social media platforms." Colonel Gibson understood that managing public information about Christine's actions would require balancing respect for her privacy with the legitimate public interest in her heroic performance. Military protocol for handling classified information was complicated by the fact that her techniques had been demonstrated aboard a civilian aircraft with multiple witnesses. "Coordinate with base security to establish a media area away from the aircraft," he instructed. and prepare a statement acknowledging the successful emergency response without disclosing specific technical details. Meanwhile, passengers were beginning to deplane through the aircraft's main door onto portable stairs that had been positioned by ground crews. Each person paused to thank Christine personally as they passed her seat, creating an impromptu receiving line that demonstrated their gratitude and respect. "God bless you," said the elderly woman from row 12, grasping Christine's hands with surprising strength. "You're an angel." "Thank you for saving my grandchildren," added the young mother, tears streaming down her face as she held her children close. One by one, passengers expressed their appreciation to the woman whose expertise had prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. Many asked for her name and contact information, wanting to maintain connection with the person who had saved them. Patrick Hughes was among the last passengers to deplane, having spent additional time talking with Christine about her military service and aviation career. His respect for her had grown throughout their conversation, and he was determined to ensure her actions received appropriate recognition. "I work in agricultural equipment sales, but I have contacts in aviation journalism," he told her. "Your story needs to be told properly. What you did today represents the best of military service and human courage." Christine appreciated his sentiment but remained concerned about unwanted publicity that would disrupt the quiet life she had built in civilian aviation. "I just want to go home to my family," she said honestly. "I understand," Patrick replied, "but heroes don't get to choose whether their stories inspire other people." Dr. Ward was also reluctant to leave without expressing her profound gratitude and professional admiration for Christine's performance under pressure. As a physician, she had developed strong appreciation for competence in crisis situations, and she had witnessed exceptional skill that impressed her deeply. "My dear, what you did today will be studied by pilots and safety experts for decades," she told Christine. "You've made a contribution to aviation that will save countless lives in the future." As the aircraft emptied, Christine found herself alone with the flight crew and military personnel who were conducting preliminary investigations and coordinating the complex logistics of getting passengers to their intended destinations. The immediate emergency was over, but the consequences of her actions were just beginning. Captain Turner and First Officer Fisher remained in the cockpit, completing post-flight procedures and preparing detailed reports for the inevitable investigation by multiple aviation authorities. Both pilots understood they had participated in something unprecedented, and their accounts would become part of aviation history. "Christine," Noah said, using her first name now that their formal cockpit relationship had evolved into mutual respect between professionals, "I've been flying for 17 years, and I've never experienced anything like what you taught us today. Your knowledge saved this aircraft and everyone aboard." "You implemented the procedures perfectly," Christine replied. "Without your skill in executing unfamiliar techniques, my knowledge wouldn't have been enough." Rebecca added her own appreciation, recognizing that Christine's expertise had been matched by her ability to teach complex procedures to pilots who had never encountered similar emergency conditions. "The way you explained those techniques while we were implementing them was remarkable. You made it possible for us to learn while we were saving our lives." The successful completion of Flight 2847's emergency demonstrated more than just individual heroism. It showcased the potential for collaboration between military and civilian aviation, the value of advanced emergency training, and the importance of maintaining expertise that could serve humanitarian purposes even after formal military service had ended. Christine's actions had also revealed the personal costs of institutional discrimination that had forced the Air Force to lose one of its most talented pilots. The knowledge and skills she had demonstrated aboard Flight 2847 represented capabilities that should have continued serving military aviation throughout her career, rather than being hidden in civilian life for 15 years. As she prepared to leave the aircraft that had become the stage for her return to public recognition, Christine reflected on the day's events and their implications for her future. The quiet anonymity she had maintained since leaving the Air Force was permanently over, replaced by a claim that would bring opportunities and responsibilities she had not sought but could not avoid. The woman who had boarded Flight 2847 in Denver as an unremarkable passenger was deplaning at Malmstrom Air Force Base as a national hero whose actions would inspire aviators and serve as a model for military veterans using their skills to serve civilian communities. Her expertise had saved 156 lives, but the story of Lieutenant Colonel Christine Falcon Powell was just beginning to unfold. 3 hours after Flight 2847's emergency landing, Christine sat in the passenger seat of a military sedan traveling the 40-minute drive from Malmstrom Air Force Base to Billings, watching familiar Montana countryside pass outside the window while trying to process the day's events and their implications for her carefully constructed civilian life. Colonel Gibson had personally arranged her transportation home, recognizing that her actions deserved military courtesy even though she had been retired for 15 years. The driver, Staff Sergeant Williams, maintained professional silence while occasionally glancing in his rearview mirror at the woman whose aviation expertise had already become legendary throughout the Air Force community. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me saying so," the sergeant finally spoke as they approached the outskirts of Billings. "What you did today is already being talked about at bases across the country. You've made every Air Force pilot proud." Christine appreciated his sentiment but remained concerned about the publicity that would inevitably follow. She had built a quiet life teaching basic flight instruction at Little Bighorn College, far removed from the advanced military aviation that had defined her earlier career. Now that anonymity was permanently shattered. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied, using the same response she had given throughout her military service when others praised actions she considered simply professional duty. Her cell phone, which had been turned off during the flight, now showed 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages as word of the emergency had spread through both military and civilian networks. The first call was from her husband David, whose message revealed the anxiety he had experienced after learning about Flight 2847's emergency through news reports before knowing whether Christine was safe. "Chris, I just heard about a United flight making an emergency landing at Malmstrom. Please call me as soon as you get this. I love you." The next several messages showed his growing concern and relief as more information became available, culminating in a text sent just 30 minutes earlier after he had confirmed she was safe. "The news is saying a passenger helped save the flight. Somehow I'm not surprised it was you." David's message reflected the understanding that had developed during their 8-year marriage. He had always known Christine possessed aviation expertise far beyond her current job, teaching basic flying skills to college students, though she had never discussed the specifics of her military service or the circumstances that had ended her Air Force career prematurely. As the sedan entered Billings city limits, Christine could see that her story had already reached her home community. Several local news trucks were parked along the street leading to the college where she taught, and her phone showed missed calls from reporters seeking interviews about her role in saving Flight 2847. "Looks like the media found you pretty quickly," Sergeant Williams observed, noting the obvious signs of news coverage in what should have been a quiet college town on a Tuesday evening. "That's what I was afraid of," Christine replied, recognizing that her preference for privacy would be difficult to maintain given the dramatic nature of her actions and their successful outcome. "May." The sergeant dropped her at the college rather than her home address, allowing her to avoid the news crews that had likely discovered her residential location through public records. Christine thanked him for his courtesy and made her way to the small office where she had spent the past 5 years teaching ground school courses and basic flight instruction to students who dreamed of aviation careers. Professor Janet Martinez, the department head who had hired Christine based on her civilian certifications without knowing her military background, was waiting in the office with a mixture of excitement and bewilderment about her colleague's sudden national prominence. "Christine, I've been fielding calls from reporters for the past 2 hours," Janet said as Christine entered the familiar space filled with aviation textbooks and student flight plans. "Nobody told me I had hired a legendary test pilot to teach basic aerodynamics." "Because I didn't want anyone to know," Christine replied honestly, settling into the chair behind her desk that was covered with tomorrow's lesson plans for students learning fundamental flying principles. "I came here to teach and live quietly, not to be famous." Janet's expression reflected the confusion many people would experience upon learning that someone with Christine's extraordinary qualifications had chosen to work in basic aviation education rather than pursuing more prestigious opportunities in commercial or military aviation. "But why would someone with your background want to teach beginning flight students? You could be working anywhere in the aviation industry." Christine's answer revealed the personal costs of institutional discrimination that had shaped her post-military life in ways most people couldn't understand. Sometimes the best places to heal from difficult experiences are the ones where you can help other people pursue dreams that were taken away from you. Her response hinted at painful history without providing details that might compromise her emotional privacy or create uncomfortable discussions about military policies that had improved significantly since her active duty service. Janet recognized that Christine's career choices involved personal factors that deserved respect rather than curiosity. "Well, regardless of your reasons for being here, you've just brought incredible honor to our program," Janet said supportively. "Every aviation student in the country is going to want to learn from the pilot who saved Flight 2847. Before Christine could respond, her personal cell phone rang with a call from David, who had been monitoring news coverage and tracking her location through concerned communication with college personnel. "Chris, where are you? There are news trucks at the house and reporters calling neighbors asking about you." "I'm at the office," she replied, grateful for his understanding and support during what was becoming an overwhelming situation. "Can you meet me here? I need to figure out how to handle all this attention." "On my way," David assured her. "And Chris, I'm proud of you. Whatever happened up there today, you did something amazing." His unconditional support meant everything to Christine, who had learned through difficult experience that many people couldn't handle relationships with partners whose professional achievements overshadowed their own careers. David's reaction demonstrated the emotional maturity that had made their marriage successful despite her reluctance to discuss her military background. While waiting for David to arrive, Christine tried to return some of the calls from military contacts who had reached out after learning of her involvement in Flight 2847's emergency. The first was from Captain Eugene Palmer, her former squadron leader at Edwards Air Force Base, whose call sign Steel had been earned through steady leadership during the challenging period when Christine's career had been derailed by institutional discrimination. "Falcon, I just heard about what you did today." Eugene's voice carried both pride and regret over a secure phone line that indicated he was calling from his current Pentagon assignment. "You saved 156 lives using techniques we developed together 15 years ago." "Hello, Steel," Christine replied, using his call sign for the first time in years and feeling the emotional weight of reconnecting with someone who had supported her during the worst period of her military service. "It's good to hear from you. Chris, what you demonstrated today proves everything we argued about your capabilities back then. The Air Force lost one of its best pilots when they forced you out, and today you showed the world what we lost." Eugene's reference to her forced retirement brought back painful memories of institutional policies and personal conflicts that had ended her military career at the height of her technical expertise. His support during that difficult time had meant everything, though it hadn't been enough to prevent the discrimination that had ultimately driven her from service. "That's all in the past," Christine said, though both of them knew the issues that had affected her career continued to impact other military women facing similar challenges. "Today was just about getting people home safely." "Maybe, but your actions today are going to start conversations about advanced emergency training that should have happened years ago. You've probably saved more lives than just the ones on that aircraft." Before their conversation could continue, David arrived at the office with the concerned expression of someone who had been watching news coverage about his wife's heroic actions while wondering how their quiet life would be affected by sudden national attention. "I'll call you back, Steele," Christine said, ending the military conversation to focus on her immediate family situation. David embraced her with the relief of someone who had spent hours worried about her safety, followed by the pride of someone learning that his wife possessed capabilities he had suspected but never fully understood. "The news is calling you a hero," he said, holding her at arm's length to look at her face and assess how she was handling the sudden spotlight. "They're saying you saved everyone on that plane using military techniques that aren't taught to commercial pilots." "I did what I had to do," Christine replied, though she could see that David understood the significance of her actions better than she was willing to acknowledge. "Now I need to figure out how to deal with all the attention this is going to bring." Their conversation was interrupted by Professor Martinez, who was monitoring calls from aviation organizations, military officials, and media representatives seeking interviews with Christine about her emergency procedures and their implications for commercial aviation safety. "Christine, the FAA wants to schedule a debriefing session about your techniques," Janet reported. "And there's a call from someone at the Pentagon who says it's urgent." The Pentagon call was from General Price, Christine's former commanding officer who now held senior responsibility for Air Force personnel policies. Her message was brief but significant. The Air Force wanted to discuss recognizing Christine's actions and potentially reviewing the circumstances that had ended her military career prematurely. "That's a conversation for another day," Christine told David after listening to General Price's voicemail. "Right now, I just want to go home and try to process what happened." But going home proved complicated by the media presence in their neighborhood. and the growing public interest in Christine's background and current life. Local residents had learned that the hero of Flight 2847 lived among them as a quiet college instructor, and many were eager to express their pride and gratitude. Mrs. Henderson, their elderly neighbor, had been telling reporters about Christine's helpfulness with yard work and snow removal, completely unaware until today that her neighbor possessed extraordinary aviation expertise. "She's always been wonderful, but I had no idea she was capable of something like this," she told a news crew. The disconnect between Christine's public heroism and her private preference for anonymity reflected the complex relationship between military service and civilian life that many veterans experienced. Her extraordinary qualifications had been hidden not from false modesty, but from a desire to heal from institutional experiences that had been professionally rewarding but personally painful. As evening approached, Christine and David decided to remain at the college office rather than face the media attention at their home. Professor Martinez had arranged for campus security to manage the reporters seeking interviews, and Christine used the quiet time to begin processing the emotional impact of her day's actions. "Are you all right with all of this?" David asked, recognizing that his wife's preference for privacy was being overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. "I'm proud of what happened today," Christine replied thoughtfully. "Those people deserved every bit of expertise I could provide. But I'm also concerned about how this changes our life here." Her answer reflected the complexity of heroic actions that, while morally necessary and professionally successful, created consequences that extended far beyond the immediate emergency. The woman who had wanted to teach basic flight instruction in quiet anonymity was now nationally recognized for aviation expertise that would inevitably bring opportunities and responsibilities she hadn't sought. The phone rang again with another interview request, this time from a major television network preparing a feature story about civilian heroes using military skills to serve their communities. Christine looked at David with the expression of someone realizing that her carefully constructed private life was permanently changed. "I think," she said slowly, "we're going to need to learn how to live with being public people." Her recognition marked the end of 15 years of anonymity and the beginning of a new chapter where her military expertise would serve broader purposes than she had ever imagined when she boarded United Flight 2847 that morning as an ordinary passenger heading home to Minneapolis. Wednesday morning brought unexpected consequences that Christine hadn't anticipated when she had chosen to act during Flight 2847's emergency. Her small office at Little Bighorn College was filled with flowers, thank you cards, and messages from complete strangers who had learned her identity through news coverage and wanted to express their gratitude for her heroic actions. "Christine, there are 3 television crews in the parking lot and reporters from 2 newspapers waiting to interview you," Professor Martinez announced as she entered the office carrying another stack of letters addressed to the hero pilot and Lieutenant Colonel Powell. The volume of correspondence revealed how deeply her story had resonated with people across the country who were inspired by her demonstration of expertise used to save civilian lives. Many letters came from military veterans who understood the significance of using skills developed during service to benefit their communities after retirement. "I don't want to be famous," Christine told David as they sorted through messages that ranged from heartfelt gratitude to job offers from major airlines seeking to employ someone with her qualifications. "I just want to teach flying and live our life." David understood her reluctance, but he also recognized that her actions had created responsibilities she couldn't avoid simply because she preferred privacy. Maybe this is an opportunity to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to other people. His reference to her forced military retirement touched on issues Christine had avoided discussing even with him during their marriage. The institutional discrimination that had ended her Air Force career remained painful 15 years later, particularly because it had prevented her from contributing to military aviation at the height of her expertise. "What exactly did happen back then?" David asked gently, recognizing that recent events had reopened emotional wounds his wife had kept private throughout their relationship. Christine's answer revealed experiences that explained both her exceptional capabilities and her preference for civilian anonymity. "I was the first woman accepted into the most advanced test pilot program, flying experimental aircraft that were decades ahead of anything the public knew existed." She paused, organizing memories that remained difficult despite the passage of time. "My innovations in emergency procedures and aircraft recovery techniques were saving lives and advancing military aviation capability significantly." David listened without interruption, understanding that she was sharing information she had protected for years. But some senior officers believed women shouldn't be flying combat-capable aircraft even in test roles. They created situations designed to prove I couldn't handle the pressures of advanced military aviation. Her explanation revealed the institutional barriers that had prevented the Air Force from retaining one of its most talented pilots. When I refused to accept limitations based on gender rather than performance, they found ways to make my service untenable. The personal costs of institutional discrimination became clear as Christine described how promising military careers could be destroyed by prejudices that had nothing to do with professional competence or dedication to service. So I left rather than fighting a system that didn't want me to succeed, regardless of how much my expertise could contribute to military effectiveness and pilot safety. David's expression reflected both anger about the injustices she had endured and admiration for her resilience in building a meaningful civilian career, despite having her military service terminated prematurely. That's why you've been teaching basic flight instruction instead of working in commercial aviation or aerospace industry? Teaching gives me purpose without requiring me to prove myself to people who might judge me based on assumptions about women in aviation, Christine explained. My students learn from my knowledge without caring about my gender or background. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door from Victoria Reed, a reporter from the Billings Gazette who had been covering local aviation stories for 8 years and understood the significance of having a legendary test pilot living quietly in their community. Ms. Powell, I'm Victoria Reed from the local newspaper. I'd like to discuss how your actions are inspiring people throughout Montana to reconsider what they think they know about their neighbors. Victoria's approach was different from the national media representatives seeking dramatic headlines about heroic actions. She was interested in the human story of someone who had chosen to serve her local community despite possessing qualifications that could have taken her anywhere in the world. People are realizing that extraordinary individuals often live among us without recognition, Victoria continued. Your story is making residents think about the hidden talents and service histories of people they see every day. Christine appreciated the reporter's thoughtful perspective, though she remained concerned about publicity that might compromise the quiet life she had built in Billings. I came here to be part of a community, not to be celebrated as different from everyone else. But maybe that's exactly why your story matters, Victoria suggested. You've shown that heroic capabilities don't require dramatic backgrounds or public recognition. Sometimes the most valuable people are those who serve quietly without seeking attention. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, General Price was reviewing Christine's service record and the circumstances that had led to her early retirement. Recent events had highlighted both the Air Force's loss of exceptional talent and the need to examine policies that had allowed discrimination to drive away valuable personnel. Colonel Adams, I want a complete review of Lieutenant Colonel Powell's case and recommendations for addressing similar situations that may have affected other qualified personnel, General Price instructed her aide. The review would likely lead to policy changes designed to prevent the loss of talented officers due to institutional bias, but it would also potentially validate Christine's experiences and demonstrate that her forced retirement had been unjustified. Ma'am, should we contact Lieutenant Colonel Powell about participating in this review? Colonel Adams asked. Let's see how she wants to handle the recognition she's receiving first, General Price decided. She's earned the right to choose how much interaction she wants with the military establishment that failed her. Back in Billings, Christine's story was having unexpected effects throughout the community as residents learned that someone they had known as a quiet college instructor possessed qualifications that had made her legendary in military aviation circles. At the coffee shop where Christine and David regularly had breakfast, owner Margaret Thompson was fielding questions from customers who wanted to understand how they had failed to recognize exceptional expertise in someone they had interacted with regularly. She always seemed very knowledgeable about flying when aviation topics came up in conversation, Margaret told curious customers, but she never indicated she was anything other than a basic flight instructor. The revelation that Christine had been living among them with hidden extraordinary qualifications was causing many residents to reconsider their assumptions about the people around them and the experiences that shaped their community members' lives. Dr. Ward, who had returned to Billings to continue her visit with her granddaughter, was telling everyone who would listen about Christine's calm competence during the Flight 2847 emergency and her genuine humility about actions that had saved 156 lives. That woman exemplifies the best qualities of military service, she told her granddaughter, a pre-med student at the University of Montana. She used her training to serve others without seeking personal recognition or reward. The story was also reaching Christine's students at Little Bighorn College, who were processing the realization that their ground school instructor possessed qualifications far beyond what was required to teach basic aerodynamics and navigation principles. "Professor Powell always made complicated topics seem simple," said Jennifer Martinez, a sophomore studying aviation management. "Now I understand why. She was teaching us techniques developed through experience most pilots never have." The students' reactions reflected both excitement about learning from someone with such exceptional background and disappointment that she had hidden her qualifications rather than using them to enhance their education with advanced knowledge. "Maybe she didn't want to overwhelm us with information we weren't ready to handle," suggested Robert Kim, a junior working toward his commercial pilot license. "Basic students need to master fundamental concepts before learning advanced techniques." Their discussion demonstrated mature understanding of educational principles and respect for Christine's teaching methods, even though they now realized she had been significantly underutilizing her expertise to accommodate their learning levels. Meanwhile, Christine was receiving calls from aviation organizations seeking her participation in safety conferences and training programs that could benefit from her knowledge of advanced emergency procedures. The International Air Safety Foundation wanted her to develop curricula based on techniques she had demonstrated aboard Flight 2847. "They're offering substantial compensation for consultation work that would use your military experience to improve commercial aviation safety," David reported after reviewing several formal proposals that had arrived by email and express delivery. Christine recognized that such opportunities could provide meaningful ways to contribute her expertise to causes that would benefit aviation safety broadly, while also generating income that would improve their financial security significantly. "It would mean traveling and public speaking," she said, weighing the benefits against her preference for quiet local teaching. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of visibility." "But think about the lives you could save by teaching other pilots what you know," David encouraged. "Yesterday proved your knowledge can make the difference between survival and disaster." His argument reflected the growing recognition that Christine's expertise represented a resource that could benefit far more people than just her current students at Little Bighorn College. Her techniques had applications throughout commercial and military aviation that could prevent future emergencies or improve outcomes when disasters occurred. The telephone rang with another call from Captain Palmer at the Pentagon, who was coordinating with General Price to develop proposals for recognizing Christine's service and potentially addressing the institutional failures that had ended her military career prematurely. "Falcon, we're preparing recommendations for formal recognition of your actions aboard Flight 2847, Eugene explained. "But we're also looking at the bigger picture of how the Air Force can acknowledge the injustices you experienced and prevent similar losses of qualified personnel." Christine's response reflected both appreciation for current military leadership's efforts to address past failures and realistic understanding of institutional change processes. "I'm grateful for your support, Steele, but I'm more interested in preventing other people from experiencing what I went through than in revisiting my own situation." "Those goals aren't mutually exclusive," Eugene replied. "Acknowledging what happened to you helps establish precedents for protecting other qualified personnel from discrimination." Their conversation was interrupted by Professor Martinez, who was coordinating with college administration to manage the continuing media interest in Christine's presence on their faculty. "Christine, the college president wants to meet with you about how we can handle the attention your story is bringing to our aviation program," Janet announced. "We're receiving inquiries from prospective students who want to study with you specifically." The irony of Christine's situation was becoming apparent to everyone involved. Her preference for anonymity had been destroyed by heroic actions that demonstrated exactly why she deserved recognition for her military service and civilian contributions. "I suppose hiding isn't really an option anymore," Christine acknowledged, accepting that recent events had created responsibilities and opportunities she couldn't avoid simply because they made her uncomfortable. David took her hand with a supportive gesture of someone committed to helping his wife navigate challenges she had never anticipated when she chose to assist during Flight 2847's emergency. "We'll figure out how to handle this together," he assured her. "And maybe we'll discover that being recognized for your abilities is better than hiding them, even if it's not what you originally wanted." Christine's story was evolving from personal heroism into broader social impact that could influence military policies, aviation safety standards, and community understanding of the hidden expertise that existed among seemingly ordinary neighbors throughout the country. The woman who had wanted only to teach basic flying lessons was discovering that her knowledge and experience represented resources too valuable to remain hidden from the people and institutions that could benefit from her exceptional qualifications. Her journey from anonymous college instructor to nationally recognized aviation hero was just beginning to unfold. 2 weeks after Flight 2847's emergency landing, Christine received an official letter that would fundamentally change her relationship with both her military past and civilian future. The heavy envelope bore the seal of the United States Air Force and contained formal notification that she had been selected to receive the Airman's Medal, the highest non-combat decoration for heroism, in recognition of her actions aboard the commercial flight. "They want to present it at a ceremony at the Pentagon," David said, reading the accompanying documents that outlined the formal recognition process, with full military honors and media coverage. Christine studied the letter with mixed emotions, recognizing that accepting the award would require her to publicly acknowledge the military service she had kept private for 15 years. The ceremony would inevitably include discussions of her background and the circumstances that had led to her early retirement from active duty. "General Price wants to meet with you personally before the ceremony," David continued, noting the handwritten note attached to the formal invitation. "She says it's important to discuss the broader implications of your recognition." The meeting with her former commanding officer would likely address the institutional review that had been initiated following Flight 2847, examining the policies and practices that had forced the Air Force to lose one of its most qualified test pilots due to gender discrimination that had been tolerated at the highest levels. "I'm not sure I'm ready to relive all of that publicly," Christine admitted, though she understood that her story had already become part of national discussions about military personnel policies and the hidden costs of institutional bias. Professor Martinez entered the office carrying another stack of correspondence, this time including formal invitations from aviation organizations, military academies, and commercial airlines seeking Christine's expertise for training programs and safety initiatives. "The Air Force Academy wants you to deliver their commencement address," Janet reported, reviewing the impressive array of opportunities that had emerged since Christine's identity had become public. "And Boeing is offering a consulting position developing emergency procedures based on your techniques." The volume and prestige of the offers reflected both the rarity of Christine's qualifications and the aviation industry's recognition that her knowledge could significantly improve safety standards throughout commercial and military flying operations. "There's also a letter from the 99s," Janet added, referring to the International Organization of Women Pilots founded by Amelia Earhart. "They want to honor you at their annual conference for advancing women's recognition in aviation." Christine understood that her actions aboard Flight 2847 had transcended individual heroism to become symbols of broader issues affecting women in aviation and military service. Her story was inspiring other women who had faced similar institutional barriers while demonstrating that expertise deserved recognition regardless of gender. "I never wanted to be a symbol," she told David later as they discussed the various invitations and opportunities that continued arriving daily. "I just wanted to use my skills to help people and teach students who love flying." David's response reflected his growing understanding of how extraordinary individuals often found themselves carrying responsibilities they had never sought. Maybe being a symbol is the price of having capabilities that can make such a significant difference in other people's lives. Their conversation was interrupted by a telephone call from Major Stewart, the F-22 pilot who had escorted Flight 2847 during the emergency. His request was both professional and personal, reflecting the impact Christine's actions had made on military aviators who understood the significance of her techniques. "Ma'am, I'm calling to request permission to visit Billings and speak with you in person about the emergency procedures you demonstrated," Ethan explained. "My squadron wants to incorporate your methods into our training programs, but we need to understand the theoretical foundation behind your techniques." Christine's response revealed both her willingness to share knowledge that could save lives and her continued discomfort with the attention her expertise was receiving from military personnel who regarded her as legendary. "Of course, Major Stewart. I'm always willing to discuss aviation safety with qualified pilots. Ma'am, if I may say so, working with you during that emergency was the highlight of my military career. Your expertise saved 156 lives and demonstrated flying techniques that most pilots never encounter." His respectful admiration was representative of reactions throughout the military aviation community, where Christine's innovations 15 years earlier had influenced training standards and emergency procedures that were still being taught to current pilots. Meanwhile, the investigation into Flight 2847's emergency had revealed mechanical failures that validated Christine's assessment and demonstrated the effectiveness of her unconventional recovery techniques. The FAA was preparing new recommendations for commercial pilot training that would incorporate elements of her methods into standard curricula. The preliminary report credits your techniques with preventing what would have been total loss of control, Rebecca Fisher informed Christine during a telephone conversation from United Airlines headquarters. The investigators say conventional procedures wouldn't have been adequate for the multiple system failures we experienced. First Officer Fisher's call was both professional and personal, expressing gratitude for Christine's life-saving assistance while requesting her participation in developing enhanced emergency training for commercial pilots. United wants to hire you as a consultant for our pilot training programs, Rebecca continued. Your knowledge could help thousands of pilots handle emergencies more effectively. The offer represented the kind of high-level consulting opportunity that could utilize Christine's expertise while providing substantial compensation for knowledge that had been underutilized during her years teaching basic flight instruction. I need to think about how much public involvement I'm ready to handle, Christine replied honestly. My preference has always been for quieter forms of service. Rebecca's response demonstrated understanding of Christine's position while emphasizing the broader implications of her decision. I respect your privacy preferences, but your techniques could prevent future disasters. The aviation industry needs what you know. Similar conversations were occurring with representatives from multiple organizations, seeking Christine's expertise for purposes ranging from military training programs to aerospace industry research initiatives. Each opportunity offered different ways to contribute her knowledge while requiring varying levels of public exposure and professional commitment. Dr. Ward, who had remained in Billings to extend her visit with her granddaughter, requested a meeting to discuss how Christine's story was affecting community perspectives on military service and the hidden expertise of local residents. My dear, your actions have caused people throughout this community to reconsider their assumptions about the backgrounds and capabilities of their neighbors. Dr. Ward explained during their conversation at the coffee shop that had become an informal gathering place for discussing Christine's story. The elderly physician's observations reflected broader social impacts that extended beyond aviation safety to include enhanced community appreciation for military veterans and recognition of the valuable skills that existed among seemingly ordinary residents. People are looking at veterans differently now, Dr. Ward continued. They're realizing that military service often develops capabilities that continue benefiting civilian communities in ways that aren't always visible. Her insight highlighted one of the most important consequences of Christine's actions: increased awareness of the hidden expertise that military veterans brought to their civilian communities, often without recognition or appropriate utilization of their specialized knowledge. At Little Bighorn College, Christine's story had transformed the aviation program from a small regional offering into a nationally recognized center, attracting prospective students who wanted to study with the legendary pilot, whose emergency techniques had saved Flight 2847. Applications have increased by 300% since your story became public, Professor Martinez reported during their weekly department meeting. Students from across the country want to learn from you specifically. The increased interest created both opportunities and challenges for a program that had been designed to serve local students seeking basic aviation careers. Christine's presence now attracted students with advanced goals and expectations that exceeded the program's traditional scope. We could expand our offerings to include advanced emergency procedures and test pilot techniques, Janet suggested. Your knowledge could support graduate-level programs that don't exist anywhere else in civilian aviation education. Christine's decision about expanding her teaching responsibilities would significantly impact both her personal life and the educational opportunities available to aviation students throughout the region. Her expertise could transform Little Bighorn College into a unique center for advanced aviation safety education. I want to help students succeed, Christine said thoughtfully, but I also want to make sure we're providing education that matches their needs and career goals realistically. Her response reflected the same careful attention to practical outcomes that had made her an effective teacher of basic aviation principles, now applied to the challenge of utilizing advanced expertise without overwhelming students who needed fundamental knowledge first. The telephone rang with another call from the Pentagon, this time from General Price personally requesting Christine's participation in policy discussions that could prevent other qualified personnel from experiencing the institutional discrimination that had ended her military career. Christine, your story has provided the catalyst we needed to address systemic problems that have been costing the military valuable talent for too long, General Price explained. Your participation in policy development could prevent other people from experiencing what you went through. The opportunity to influence military policies represented a chance for Christine to ensure her difficult experiences contributed to positive institutional changes that would benefit future service members facing similar challenges. What kind of participation are you requesting? Christine asked, recognizing that any involvement with Pentagon policy development would require substantial time and public visibility. We want you to chair a commission reviewing personnel policies affecting qualified individuals who face discrimination based on factors unrelated to their professional competence, General Price explained. Your background and credibility would provide authority that current policymakers lack. The position would require Christine to become publicly involved with exactly the kind of institutional issues she had preferred to avoid during her civilian years, but it would also provide opportunities to prevent other qualified individuals from losing military careers due to discrimination. I need time to discuss this with my family, Christine replied, understanding that accepting such a role would fundamentally change her relationship with both military and civilian aviation communities. Of course, but please understand that your unique combination of technical expertise, institutional experience, and demonstrated character makes you the ideal person to lead these essential reforms. As Christine considered the various opportunities and responsibilities that had emerged from her actions aboard Flight 2847, she realized her quiet years of civilian teaching had prepared her for much larger roles in advancing aviation safety and military personnel policies. The woman who had wanted only to heal from past injustices while serving local students was discovering that her knowledge and experience represented resources too valuable to remain confined to basic flight instruction, regardless of her personal preferences for privacy and anonymity. Her journey from anonymous college instructor to nationally recognized aviation expert was approaching decisions that would define not only her future career, but also her legacy of service to both military and civilian communities that could benefit from her exceptional qualifications. The next phase of Christine's life would require choosing between continued quiet service and accepting the public responsibilities that accompanied recognition of her extraordinary expertise. 6 months after Flight 2847's emergency landing, Christine stood at the podium in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, wearing her dress uniform for the first time in 15 years, as she accepted the Airman's Medal in recognition of her life-saving actions. The ceremony brought together military leadership, aviation industry officials, and several passengers from the flight who had traveled to Washington to witness her formal recognition. Lieutenant Colonel Christine Powell exemplifies the finest traditions of military service. General Price announced as she pinned the medal to Christine's uniform. Her expertise, developed through years of dedicated military aviation, served to save civilian lives when her country needed her skills most. The ceremony marked more than individual recognition. It represented institutional acknowledgement of both Christine's contributions and the Air Force's mistakes in allowing discrimination to drive away exceptional talent. Her presence at the Pentagon symbolized the military's commitment to policy reforms that would prevent similar losses in the future. Patrick Hughes, the businessman who had sat beside her in seat 7E, was among the passengers attending the ceremony. His initial amazement at discovering Christine's hidden expertise had evolved into lasting friendship and professional collaboration on aviation safety initiatives. "That woman changed my understanding of heroism," he told reporters gathered for the event. Real heroes often live among us unrecognized, serving their communities quietly until circumstances require them to reveal their extraordinary capabilities. Dr. Ward, now 84 and using a walking cane, had made the trip from Billings specifically to witness Christine's recognition. Her medical background had given her unique appreciation for Christine's competence under pressure, and she had become one of the strongest advocates for honoring her actions. "I've seen many people handle emergencies during my medical career," Dr. Ward said during the reception following the ceremony. but I've never witnessed someone demonstrate such complete mastery of complex technical skills while maintaining the calm demeanor necessary to teach others during a life-threatening crisis. Major Stewart and Captain Collins, the F-22 pilots who had escorted Flight 2847, participated in the ceremony representing the military aviators whose training had been influenced by Christine's innovations. Their salute over the radio had become legendary within Air Force circles as an example of recognizing excellence regardless of service status. Working with Falcon during that emergency taught us more about advanced flying techniques than years of formal training, Ethan told the assembled audience. Her knowledge represents capabilities that should never have been lost to institutional discrimination. Captain Collins added her perspective on Christine's impact on current military aviation. Lieutenant Colonel Powell's emergency procedures are now taught throughout our training programs. Her expertise continues saving lives every time pilots use techniques she developed. The formal ceremony concluded Christine's transition from anonymous college instructor to nationally recognized aviation expert. But her most important decision had been accepting General Price's invitation to chair the Pentagon Commission reviewing personnel policies that affected qualified individuals facing institutional discrimination. The Commission's work will ensure that military service evaluates personnel based on competence and character rather than irrelevant personal characteristics, Christine told the gathered media representatives. No one should lose the opportunity to serve their country because of prejudices that have nothing to do with professional qualifications. Her acceptance of the commission role represented a commitment to preventing other qualified individuals from experiencing the institutional barriers that had ended her own military career. The position required substantial time away from Billings, but it offered opportunities to create lasting policy changes that could benefit thousands of future service members. David had supported her decision to accept the Pentagon position, recognizing that her expertise could contribute to institutional reforms that extended far beyond aviation safety. You have knowledge and experience that can prevent other people from facing the discrimination you experienced, he had told her during their discussions about the commission role. Their marriage had grown stronger through the challenges of Christine's sudden public recognition. David's understanding of her military background had deepened his appreciation for both her technical capabilities and the personal resilience that had enabled her to rebuild a meaningful civilian life after institutional injustices had ended her military service prematurely. I'm proud that my wife's expertise saved 156 lives, David told Victoria Reed during an interview for the Billings Gazette's follow-up coverage of Christine's Pentagon recognition, but I'm even prouder that she's using her experience to make sure other qualified people don't face the discrimination she encountered. Back in Billings, Christine's story had created lasting changes in community understanding of military veterans and the hidden expertise that existed among local residents. Mayor Timothy Gray had proclaimed Christine Powell Day to honor her contributions and recognize the valuable skills that veterans brought to civilian communities. Lieutenant Colonel Powell's actions demonstrate that heroes often live among us unrecognized, Mayor Gray said during the proclamation ceremony at Veterans Memorial Park. Her story reminds us to appreciate the service and capabilities of all our community members. Little Bighorn College had transformed its aviation program based on national interest generated by Christine's story. The program now offered advanced courses in emergency procedures and aircraft recovery techniques that attracted students from throughout the country who wanted to learn from the legendary pilot whose knowledge had saved Flight 2847. Professor Martinez had been promoted to dean of the expanded aviation school that bore Christine's name. The Christine Powell Center for Aviation Safety Excellence provided education that bridged military and civilian flying techniques, offering students access to advanced knowledge that was available nowhere else in civilian aviation education. Her presence transformed our small regional program into a nationally recognized Center for Aviation Safety Education, Janet explained to prospective students during campus tours. Students learn not just basic flying skills, but advanced emergency procedures developed through military test pilot experience. Christine's teaching responsibilities had evolved to include graduate-level courses in experimental aircraft procedures and institutional leadership that prepared students for careers in both military and civilian aviation. Her classroom incorporated lessons learned from both her technical expertise and her experiences overcoming institutional discrimination. The most important thing I teach students is that competence and character matter more than conforming to other people's expectations, Christine told her advanced emergency procedures class during their final session before her departure for Washington. Sometimes the most valuable contributions come from people who refuse to accept limitations based on irrelevant factors. Her students understood they were learning from someone whose knowledge had been developed through extraordinary experiences and validated through life-saving actions that had changed aviation safety standards throughout the industry. The FAA had incorporated Christine's emergency techniques into standard commercial pilot training curricula, ensuring that her innovations would benefit aviation safety far beyond the passengers of Flight 2847. Airlines throughout the world were implementing procedures based on her methods for handling multiple system failures and maintaining aircraft control under extreme conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Powell's techniques have already been used successfully in 17 subsequent emergencies. FAA Administrator Michael Wright reported during congressional testimony about aviation safety improvements. Her knowledge is saving lives on a regular basis through enhanced pilot training that incorporates military test pilot expertise. United Airlines had established the Christine Powell Aviation Safety Fellowship, providing annual scholarships for military veterans pursuing civilian aviation careers. Captain Turner and First Officer Fisher had personally advocated for the program, recognizing Christine's role in saving not only Flight 2847, but also their own professional careers. Working with Lieutenant Colonel Powell during that emergency was the most educational experience of my flying career, Noah told fellowship applicants during their selection interviews. Her expertise represents the kind of advanced knowledge that can make the difference between survival and disaster when everything goes wrong simultaneously. Rebecca Fisher had accepted a position as United's Director of Advanced Emergency Training, developing programs based on Christine's techniques for the airline's pilot training centers. Lieutenant Colonel Powell proved that commercial aviation can benefit tremendously from military emergency procedures. She explained to pilots learning the new training standards. The broader impact of Christine's story extended beyond aviation safety to influence military recruitment and retention policies that recognize the value of diverse perspectives and experiences in developing institutional effectiveness. Her commission work was identifying systematic problems that had cost the military qualified personnel across multiple career fields. The Powell Commission's recommendations will prevent the loss of valuable talent due to institutional biases that undermine military effectiveness, General Price told Pentagon leadership during briefings on personnel policy reforms. Lieutenant Colonel Powell's case study demonstrates how discrimination costs the military capabilities it cannot afford to lose. Christine's final day in Billings before departing for her Pentagon assignment was marked by a community gathering at the coffee shop, where she and David had shared countless quiet breakfasts during their years of anonymous civilian life. The informal reception brought together students, colleagues, neighbors, and friends who wanted to express their appreciation for her service and wish her success in her new role. Margaret Thompson, the coffee shop owner, presented Christine with a photograph signed by dozens of community members who had come to understand and appreciate the extraordinary capabilities of their formerly anonymous neighbor. "You've shown us that heroes don't need recognition to serve their communities," Margaret said during the presentation. "But when circumstances require them to reveal their capabilities, we have an obligation to honor their service and learn from their example." Christine's response reflected the humility that had characterized her civilian service and would guide her approach to the institutional reform responsibilities she was accepting at the Pentagon. "I've learned more from this community than I ever taught," she told the gathered friends and neighbors. "You've shown me that healing from difficult experiences often comes through serving others and finding purpose in quiet contributions that make life better for everyone around us." Dr. Ward, who had become a close friend during the months following Flight 2847, offered the perspective of someone who had observed Christine's character development from emergency competence through institutional recognition to community leadership. "My dear, you've demonstrated that the most valuable people are often those who serve without seeking attention," Dr. Ward said. "Your expertise saved lives, but your character has inspired a community to better understand and appreciate the veterans who live among us." As Christine prepared to leave Billings for Washington, she reflected on the journey that had taken her from forced military retirement through years of civilian teaching to national recognition and institutional reform responsibilities. Her story had evolved from personal healing to community service to broader social impact that could prevent other qualified individuals from experiencing the discrimination she had faced. "I never expected boarding a flight to Minneapolis would change my life so completely," she told David as they packed for their move to Washington. "But maybe everything that happened was meant to serve purposes larger than my personal preferences for privacy." David's response captured the perspective of someone who had watched his wife transform from a woman hiding from painful military experiences into a nationally recognized leader whose expertise could benefit thousands of people. "You've always had the knowledge and character to serve at this level," he assured her. "Recent events just provided the circumstances that made your capabilities visible to people who needed to recognize them." Christine's departure from Billings marked the end of 15 years of anonymous civilian life, and the beginning of a new chapter where her military expertise would serve institutional reform and aviation safety improvement at the national level. Her story had demonstrated that extraordinary capabilities often existed in unexpected places, waiting for circumstances that required their revelation. The woman who had appeared to be an ordinary passenger in Seat 7F had proven that heroes often lived quietly among their communities until moments of crisis revealed their exceptional qualifications. Her actions aboard Flight 2847 had saved 156 lives, but her broader impact on aviation safety, military policies, and community understanding of veteran contributions would benefit countless others for generations to come. Lieutenant Colonel Christine Falcon Powell's journey from anonymous college instructor to nationally recognized aviation expert and institutional reformer exemplified the resilience, expertise, and dedication that military veterans brought to civilian communities throughout the country. Her story would inspire both current service members and veterans to recognize the value of their skills and the importance of using their capabilities to serve others, regardless of whether that service received public recognition. The quiet woman with the mystery novel had become a symbol of hidden heroism that existed in communities everywhere, waiting for moments when ordinary people revealed their extraordinary capabilities to serve causes greater than themselves. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.